Chapter 18, The Conservative Frankists of Vienna. The greatest danger to the Jewish nation from the perspective of Jewish law is the conservative movement. The conservatives destroy and misrepresent halakha and attempt to fashion it according to their own desires. Rabbi Shalom Kowalski, Hamakein Hakaredi, 14 Tammuz, 5745. This is an Orthodox publication that is still in print today, and this particular entry is dated July 3rd, 1985. The conservatives are so liberal they even allow Orthodox Jews to join their congregations. Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner, 1907 to 1980. When the State of Israel marched into Lebanon in 1982 and fought the PLO, there was launched upon Israel and world Jewry what author Cynthia Ozick calls a media pogrom. Joining the chorus of denouncers were Jewish-born traitors who even lent their names and invested their energies into the task of raising funds and propagandizing for the PLO. This ilk included neo-Sabbateans whose treasonous publications utilized Illuminati symbols. They had originally formed an organization called Briera, which had been exposed by prominent Jewish leaders such as Professors Howard Adelson and Rael Jean Isaacs as communists and Sabbateans. Smarting under the pressures of these exposés, including a scathing lecture at Manhattan's prestigious West Side Institutional Synagogue by the author in 1977, Briera disbanded. Meanwhile, certain of their activists, such as Arthur Waskow, maintained their interfaces with KGB agents largely under the guise of Novosti, a KGB international propaganda and disinformation organization, having a budget of over $200 million a year. At the height of its activities, Briera's KGB directives were handled through Novosti's then Manhattan-based agent, both red and now dead, Dr. Hyman Loomer. Novosti was the special disinformation arm of the KGB. It was once headed by Gorbachev. During the summer of 1982, the new Novosti Front organization substituting for Briera was called the New Jewish Agenda, NJA. On June 25, 1982, Professor Howard Adelson, writing in the Jewish press, stated in an article entitled The Same Hag Dressed in a New Veil that the NJA was the same Briera hag in the new NJA veil. He further went on to say that the same hag in the new rag was assuming the guise of being concerned about Jewish issues when it was in reality allied with Jew haters and the PLO in what he termed a monstrous conspiracy, whirling together with the Rockefellers, the oil interests, and the Arab states. Now, NJA principals listed their names in full-page ads, such as that placed by the so-called Ad Hoc Committee for Palestinian Rights to condemn Israel and raise money for the PLO. The NJA was organized in 1980 and listed Nachum Goldman, already excommunicated by the Supreme Rabbinic Court of America in 1975 for treasonous activities against the Jewish people, and the French radical socialist Premier Pierre Mendès France among its founders. The NJA, which also advocated the abomination of homosexuality, was formally excommunicated in November of 1982. However, God had previously struck dead both Goldman on August 29th and Mendès France on October 18th of 1982. Among the names that appeared in the forefront of the NJA and as a signatory to pro-PLO ads in the papers was that of so-called Rabbi Everett Gendler, now excommunicated from Judaism. Gendler, a graduate of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, which to this day prominently displays a cornerstone with Jacob Schiff's name in its courtyard, is a disciple of Louis Finkelstein, born 1895, who in turn was a disciple of Solomon Schechter. Schechter was a disciple of communist revolutionary Adolf Jelinek, 1821 to 1893, who, as a supporter of Karl Marx's inspired 1848 revolution on the barricades, was more fortunate than his brother Hermann, 1822 to 1848, who was summarily executed by the Austrian government. Adolf Jelinek was positively documented by Gershom Scholem as a Frankist Sabbatian. While most disciples of Finkelstein were or are neither communists nor Sabbatians, The relationship is not coincidental, for the seminary is a hotbed today of the most heretical antinomian doctrines against the survival of Judaism, and is true to the ideals of Schechter and Jelinek. It thus fulfills the life ambitions of the Sabbatean Frankist founder of the conservative movement, Zechariah Frankl, and the Sabbatean Frankist conspirators of Vienna, who, as true disciples of Jacob Frank, worked indefatigably and industriously in founding, financing, and forging alliances with the National Socialist mentors of Adolf Hitler and their German-Austrian anti-Semitic parties. Among those enlisted by them for their dirty work was a certain M.L. Rodkinson, 1845 to 1904. Just as it became apparent to American Jewry that it had traitors hell-bent on the destruction of world Jewry within its midst, so it became apparent in the 1880s to one of Jewry's greatest leaders in Austria, Rabbi A. Joseph Bloch, 1850 to 1925, that the Austrian Jews of his day had similar garbage on their hands. Until the first comprehensive English translation of the Talmud by Sonshino Press appeared, 1935 to 1952, a non-comprehensive translation by M.L. Rodkinson was the only one in existence. Most scholars utilizing his works were unaware that he was a sinister personality whose primary efforts to render portions of the Talmud into English was for the purpose of disinformation and for providing grist for anti-Semitic attacks on Jewry via careful distortion of selected words and mistranslation of Talmudic passages and facilitating their use out of context. Unfortunately, however, Jew haters have even managed to distort excerpts from the superior comprehensive English Sonshino Talmud for their nefarious purposes. Joseph Bloch's My Reminiscences, Arno Press, New York, 1973, exposes Rodkinson's intrigues. Rodkinson lived a Frankist existence. He changed religions, forged passports, and was chased by the police for fraud and forgery. His real name was M.L. Fromkin, but he used many aliases. Rodkinson edited a Hebrew paper called Hekeza, whose purpose was to convert Jews to Christianity. One of Rodkinson's Hebrew works reiterated the insidious blood libel that Jews utilized Christian blood to bake matzot for Passover. In Romer's Liederblatt, November 11, 1883, it is said of Rodkinson's attempts at finding anti-Semitic libels, "Never has an enemy of the Jew looked for traces so badly and so stupidly." The libelous information was widely circulated in Austria, but did not prevent, in the words of Bloch, prominent personalities of the Viennese congregation to kindly receive Rodkinson. This group of prominent personalities, of course, were the Frankist Sabbatians, who included Adolf Jelinek and Emanuel Baumgarten. In reading Bloch, one notices that he was a keen observer of treasonous behavior by Jews in Vienna, but he had no idea this behavior was orchestrated by Frankist interests operating under his nose. Bloch reports that Rodkinson moved to Vienna in 1884, whereupon Bloch was warned by a Protestant scholar from Germany to beware of Rodkinson. Now, Bloch was in the process of defending himself in court against the infamous Nazi role model, Professor August Rohling, 1839 to 1931, who heaped anti-Semitic libels upon Jewry. These libels were legally challenged by Rabbi Bloch, after which Rodkinson moved to Vienna primarily to sabotage Bloch in the forthcoming legal proceedings. In Vienna, Rodkinson continued his diatribes against Jews and Judaism. His libelous Hebrew booklet Barkai, which was billed as a scientific publication, characterized the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, in Marxist metaphor as bartering Jews, nomadic profiteers, and exploiters of labor produced by others. Bloch characterized this work as the Hebrew counterpart of an insidious anti-Semitic work by Adolf Warmund entitled The Law of Nomadism and the Present Rule of the Jews. In assessing Rodkinson's diatribe, Rabbi Bloch consulted his legal counsel, Dr. Joseph Kopp, and Dr. Kopp's head clerk, Dr. Frederick Tesner, for their opinion. The consensus was that Rodkinson's writings were extremely hazardous because, while they were masked as apologetics, they were dangerously and cunningly aimed at undermining the Jewish faith. Tesner thought that all the support in the Jewish community that Rodkinson had received was due to his talent for playing both sides. However, Tesner's evaluation is astute based on the facts that he had available to him. He had no inkling of a conspiracy. The historical finale of the Rodkinson episode smacks of collusion. Here is what happened. Rabbi Bloch defeated Rolling in court by forcing Rolling to withdraw a libel suit he instituted against the rabbi. Rabbi Bloch was able to prove that Rolling, 1, was guilty of perjury, 2, was incapable of reading Talmudic and rabbinic quotations, which he twisted against the Jews, 3, he falsified non-existing works for the purpose of libeling Jews, 4, he falsified Talmudic passages, 5, he actually knew that Jews did not use Christian blood for ritual purposes, and 6, he renewed the blood libel. Having finished off Rolling, Rabbi Bloch proceeded to expose Rodkinson as Rolling's supplier of material for anti-Jewish literature in a very ingenious manner without risking any legal tangles with him. Using a pseudonym, Kolbo, he wrote an article in the Jewish tabloid Newsit that appeared on November 20th, 1885, under the heading, "The Third in the League." Rabbi Bloch suggested, without mentioning Rodkinson's name, that in addition to Rolling and his known colleague, apostate Justice Aaron Bremen, there was a third party. Here is the entire letter. August Rolling has been completely defeated. By withdrawing his action for libel against Dr. Bloch, who has accused him of perjury, he himself admitted before all the world that he had the audacity to spread the worst accusations against the Jews on the strength of Talmudic and rabbinic quotations which he himself was unable to read. Further, that he quoted non-existing works as material for the accusation, and that he falsified passages of the Talmud, and again that he accused the Jews in particular of using the blood of Christians for ritual purposes, although he might have known from Latin and other works that such an accusation is untrue. Unfortunately, the harm done by Rolling is so great that his disappearance from the anti-Semitic arena alone does not suffice. The whole biography of this man, his shameful proceedings against the Jews, must be examined in detail and fully revealed to the public. We must find out who supplied him with the material for his slanderous writings. He himself is ignorant, and yet he has quoted passages from the chief Kabbalistic work Zohar, accusing the Jews that they slaughtered Christian virgins as a sacrifice pleasing to God. Who has put these Kabbalistic quotations into his hands? Justice Bremen has not done so, as he himself in a letter to Dr. Albagen expresses his surprise that Rolling should have published 2 booklets in which there were quotations from the Zohar, which he could not even read, as he, Bremen, knew very well because he was teaching him, Rolling, at the time. He has further admitted that the famous Kabbalistic appendix to his Jewish Mirror, which asserts on the authority of a Kabbalistic work that the slaughter of Christian virgins is a work pleasing to God, has not been written by him. Altogether, we believe that Justice Bremen was not so thoroughly bad as to assert or insinuate that the Jews have a secret blood ritual and use the blood of Christians for religious rites. It was not Justice Bremen, but some other Jew who must have been well read in the Zohar and other Kabbalistic writings, who supplied August Rolling with the Kabbalistic quotations he has employed, and who has insinuated, in spite of his knowing better, that accusations of the blood rite could be inferred from them against the Jews. In the Tribune, and then in his first book against the rabbis, August Rolling mentions a Jew with whom he associates and who renders him services for his scandalous work. In comparison with this villain, who was wicked enough to support those blood accusations against the Jews with the help of Kabbalistic quotations, Justice Bremen seems a man of honor. This third man of the League must be found. Whoever contributes to this purpose serves Judaism and prevents further mischief. If August Rolling gave an opinion in the Ritter trial in which a passage from the supplement to the Zohar, Tikkunai Zohar Tikkun 21, is quoted, which is to prove that the Jews must kill a Christian maiden who was with child from a Jew, together with this child in the womb, he really could not have possibly found this fabricated horrible passage himself, but it must have been prompted to him by some Jew who knew this supplement of the Zohar, and this Jew is the third in the league who must be discovered and disarmed. May the readers of this paper communicate to the editor any slight evidence which could lead to tracing this wicked traitor. Kolbo. Prior to this letter, Bloch had written an article in another Austrian weekly under his real name entitled Aaron Bremen and R., in which he quoted from a document dated March 11, 1884, obtained through discovery via his litigation with Rolling, referring to R. Between these two articles, it was very easy for Viennese Jewry to figure out that R was Rodkinson. Accordingly, Viennese Jewry dropped R like a hot potato. When Rodkinson realized what was happening, he began a propaganda campaign on his own behalf that included several thousand copies of a pamphlet in his defense to get him back into the graces of Austrian Jewry. Now, the newspaper, Newsit, previously referred to, was a weekly newspaper of Austrian Jewry founded in 1861, but taken over by Adolf Jelinek, 1820 to 1893, in 1882. Adolf Jelinek was a preacher in the Leipzig synagogue, established by the Sabbatean Frankist Zechariah Frankl. He was also the main teacher of Solomon Schechter, who became founder of the American conservative heresy of Judaism and its bastard counterpart in Israel, the Masorati cult. True to form, Jelinek came to Rodkinson's rescue and wrote an editor's marginal note to correspondence by Rodkinson. The third issue of Newsit in 1887 presented Rodkinson in what Rabbi Bloch described as a freshly washed bathing gown of innocence, to the surprised readers who still remembered the article, the third in the league. The Vienna Frankists reprinted and widely circulated this item. Simultaneously, they began to put in place a special Hebrew printing office that was supposed to be under R's supervision. All the machines and type were in place when Rodkinson was apprehended by the authorities. A police report dated March 9, 1882, indicated he was arrested for fraud under a warrant of capture issued by the St. Petersburg Criminal Court. Pursuant to his capture, the daily Viennese press was replete with stories of Rodkinson's criminal past and his affiliation with Rolling. Rabbi Bloch subsequently testified against Rodkinson. It was the rabbi's expose in the Vienna press, together with Rodkinson's propaganda sent to Russia, that alerted the Russian courts to Rodkinson's whereabouts. On the day following Rodkinson's arrest, Austrian Prime Minister Count Taft personally congratulated Rabbi Bloch. Emanuel M. Baumgarten, 1828 to 1908, one of R's prominent supporters, dominated Vienna Jewry's congregational board. The Newsit was considered to be the official organ of the board, and concerning him, Rabbi Bloch states, he continued to support R in jail and beyond. A prominent financier of Rodkinson's operations was Baron Albert Rothschild. Having been caught with his pants down, Rothschild made a public record of asking Baumgarten to return the huge sum of money drawn on his banking firm for R. Rothschild played the part of a duped supporter. What emerges from a close inspection of Viennese Jewry in the latter part of the 19th century is that its establishment is controlled by a Sabbatean Frankist underground, who, through their influence on the infrastructure of the community and its media, could orchestrate innocent Jews into supporting their causes. A fuller picture emerges of what Baumgarten and Jelinek were up to as we study them in greater detail, together with their nefarious activities. Here is a biographical summary of the aforementioned individuals and other Viennese Sabbatean Frankist personalities who worked in concert to subvert Austrian Jewry, and as Rabbi Bloch has shown, were working with one of Hitler's mentors, August Rolling, in promoting anti-Semitism. Albert Solomon Rothschild, 1844 to 1911, was the grandson of Solomon Mayer, 1774 to 1855, of the Viennese Rothschild branch, and youngest son of Anselm, 1803 to 1874, who was Solomon Mayer's only child. Albert married his cousin Caroline, daughter of Alphonse Rothschild. Emanuel M. Baumgarten, 1828 to 1908, was a man who had a yeshiva background and expertise in Hebrew letters. He conspired in the crypto-Frankist attempt to develop their own scholars who would break the back of authentic Judaism. The Frankists achieved this through their nefarious institution, founded 1862, with the distinguished Hebrew title for a house of study, Bet HaMidrash. Among his top cohorts in the Bet HaMidrash were Isaac Hirsch Weiss and the Bet HaMidrash's founder, Adolf Jelinek. Adolf Jelinek, 1820 to 1893, was a Moravian Sabbatean Frankist. Proof for his Frankism rests in correspondence between Jelinek and Sabbatean Aaron Chorin's ordained disciple, the Hungarian cleric Leopold Low, 1811 to 1875, discovered by Professor Gershom Scholem, which he expounded in a lecture, attended by the author, at Boston's Hebrew College on November 30th, 1975. The correspondence was loaded with Sabbatean Frankist metaphor of a typical antinomian revolutionary character reflected in both their personal deeds. Low was a Marxist activist and agitated mobs against the Hungarian governments. Jelinek arrived in Prague in 1838 and worked in the revolutionary conspiracies with other Frankist communists such as Michael J. Sachs, 1808 to 1864, and Wolfgang Wesley, 1801 to 1870. Sachs succeeded Leopold Zunz, Moses Hess's cousin, as head of the Prague Frankists. Jelinek came to Vienna in 1857 and established a reputation for himself as a brilliant and inspiring preacher. Jelinek promoted the Illuminist goals of destroying religions and formed the Kirchlicher Verein, the Church Society, with Christian clergymen. It was a radical religious society aimed at destroying religious and moral values. It mobilized radicalized clergy towards Marxist goals under the guise of seeking religious understanding. The Verein sought representation at the Frankfurt German National Assembly in 1848. It was foiled in its attempt by the astute Saxonian Minister of Religious Affairs, who smelled a rat. Jelinek, however, served on the board of another more successful front that promoted communist infiltration of Slavic countries through Germanic emigres under the guise of promoting German cultural activities. His son George, 1851 to 1911, following in his father's footsteps, was baptized after his father's death. He was professor of public law at the Illuminastic bastions of Basel and Heidelberg. Isaac and Mannheimer's roots, 1793 to 1865, derived from the Mannheim Frankists who produced Moses Hess. He was a radical reform cleric and an avid supporter of Karl Marx. He embraced foreign language synagogue services with the complete elimination of Hebrew, and he advocated playing tunes composed by Christian composers on the organ. Mannheimer came to Vienna in 1824 when Leopold Zunz was on a special mission to chart the future course of Sabbatean Frankist Illuminati goals, with the Prague Frankists from September 1835 to July 1836. They realized that in order to attract more flies to the honey had to be made more alluring. They laid down a methodology to attract those Jews who could not stand the desecration of the Sabbath laws with organ music or other perversions of the synagogue services. Their reform phony rabbis waited 9 years for the opportune moment to act. After Zechariah Frankel's public exit from a convention for reform rabbis in 1845, under the guise of wishing to conserve the use of Hebrew in prayer services, the door was wide open, and roles were assigned to the Frankist clergy as to who and how the reform moderations would take place. Accordingly, Mannheimer was chosen to develop a new moderate service hereinafter called the Mannheimer Ritual. It was said that Mannheimer had matured. He cut out the organ, put Hebrew in the Reform service, and excised its Christian composers. Nevertheless, the religious community attacked him, for they realized his greater danger as a wolf in sheep's clothing to the survival of Judaism. Working in concert to conserve Judaism with him was the Bet HaMidrash. The coordinator of the conservative enterprise was Michael Sachs until his death in 1864. He was dubbed the architect of moderate reform. On the communist front, Mannheimer agitated Viennese youth to man the barricades in the Marxist Austrian uprising. The first victims, 15 students, included 3 apostate Jews, Karl Spitzer, 1830 to 1848, Bernard Hirschman, and Isidor Langer. Mannheimer eulogized them and arranged with a radical Christian chaplain for a common grave, contrary to the tenets of all the victims' respective religions. As a part of Frankist strategic sneak attack strategy, Mannheimer influenced Jelinek not to install an organ in his congregation. Jelinek got the message and cloaked himself with false righteousness and decided to publicly be an opponent against the removal of references to sacrifices and returning to Zion in the synagogue service. Isaac Hirsch Weiss, 1815 to 1905, was born in Moravia and had a yeshiva background. Having suffered business losses, he was impressed in 1864 into service by the Viennese Frankists and given a position in the Bet HaMidrash. His assignment was ultimately to write a definitive work undermining the authority of the oral law. This work came out in 5 Hebrew volumes under the title Dor V'Dorshan, 1871 to 1891. The Vienna Frankists assured Weiss's financial success, keeping him in comfort. They also financed the mass distribution of Weiss's encyclopedia into the religious bastions of Judaism in Eastern Europe. Based on shoddy assumptions, Weiss's work was accepted by gullible, uncritical, and amateur Talmudists. Quick to expose Weiss, Talmudic scholars launched an offensive, found that it was only partially effective, for they lacked the massive funds of the Frankists and their media know-how. The most outstanding warrior for God in the battle for truth and justice against Weiss and his Frankist colleagues was Rabbi Isaac Halevi, 1847 to 1914, originator of the concept of international unification of all religious Jews against the international destroyers of Judaism. Halevi wrote Dorot HaRishonim, which covers in depth the development and transmission of authentic Judaism from the time of Ezra to the completion of the Talmud. Dorot HaRishonim is replete with documented demolitions of the theories of Frankel's heretical historical school. Furthermore, Halevi not only exposed the pretentiousness and intellectual dishonesty, but his work was loaded with examples of their abysmal knowledge of the Bible and Jewish law. As a glaring, typical example, Halevi pointed to statements in Weiss's Dor V'Dorshan as follows. The prophet is familiar with the political situation in the eastern country during the exile, and explicitly mentions Cyrus and describes his period. This and other stinging criticisms of Weiss are summarized in a section entitled Herot HaMkeher Al Gion Dor V'Dorhai Dorot HaRishonim, Jerusalem, Mifal Seferim, 1939, page 269 to 292. Weiss said that the prophet is speaking from hindsight. Weiss arrogantly claimed that the Torah is not the word of God, but a product of the social conditions of the Jewish people. So the Bible, according to Weiss, is putting one over on us. Weiss then rhetorically asked, where can we indeed find in the Bible anywhere that the prophet could predict in like manner names and events? Halevi exposes Weiss's ignorance of the Bible with several biblical citations. For example, behold, a child shall be born unto the house of David, Josiah by name, and shall slay the priests of the high places that burn incense. 1 Kings chapter 13, verse 2.